This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I am here with our good friend Dan Donovan from Hooked in Leslieville. How are you today, Dan?
I'm excellent, Jamie. Thanks. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Now, we are here this afternoon to speak about a subject that we have touched upon many times over the years that we have known each other, and that is the mislabeling of items on restaurant menus. Is this something that you have experienced at many points in your life in the food and hospitality business?
Well, I think we've all come across it for sure. And I think that there's a broad spectrum of intent. I think there's certainly some malicious intent to substitute a less expensive product for something that's viewed as a premium by the public. I think a lot of times there's just sloppiness, mislabeling, laziness to change menus when supply lines change. But I don't think that there's the care taken with it in general in the restaurant business that ought to be taken.
What would you say the most egregious example of menu mislabeling is that you have seen in your experience?
Well, I think whenever there's a branded product, whether it's a piece of beef that comes from a particular farm, or in our world, a fish that's caught by a particular fishery or comes from a particular location, and it's another product is substituted for it, that to me is very egregious. On a health level, I've not experienced it, but where certain products are substituted and they have a health impact. I think on an ethical level, there's we all know the famous story of McDonald's using beef tallow, and a lot of vegans being particularly upset about that.
Of course, yes.
But I think on a more common basis is organics. An organic green salad that's not, and people who have made choices from a health or a lifestyle perspective and they choose to support organics are being cheated on that. So I think those are serious issues.
I think one of the most prevalent mislabeling issues that I have seen would be that of wild versus farmed fish, for example.
Absolutely, and that's a difficult one because I think the perception is that the customer wants the wild fish. And oftentimes in Canada, the supply lines are such that farmed fish is the more readily available. And so certainly in certain times of the year, the farmed fish is more likely to be on a menu.
How transparent is that supply line in the world of fish?
The supply, it depends on where you sit on the supply chain, I suppose. We're very fortunate in that we deal very directly with either the fisher or the grower in many cases, and we control all of our own cargo. So we actually have pretty good transparency through our supply chain. And any products that aren't that directly purchased, we're pretty careful to make sure that there's various levels of certification on it so that we have a comfort. Because that's part of our brand. We're purporting to know that. We promise to know that on behalf of our customers. We do that heavy lifting. If you're elsewhere in the supply chain, you really are dependent on the honesty and integrity of a lot of people. And we all know that that's challenged in tough economic times. To the extent that the product is sourced within Ontario or within Canada, there's a greater ease of determining the authenticity of the product. Once the product goes outside of the Canadian boundaries, I would argue it gets very, very murky. Products move internationally across borders with great ease, and there's certain federal laws that I want to say that make that even more difficult. And I'll give you a funny little example. We buy whitefish from a great little fishery in Georgian Bay. But it's so far north in Georgian Bay that logically and practically it only makes sense to ship it across through Sioux, Michigan, and back in. We take it across again at Detroit. Mm-hmm. That comes now as product of USA, which to me doesn't make any sense. But we're not allowed to sell it as product of Canada anymore. when clearly that's fish from Killarney. And it arrives faster coming through the U.S. than had we shipped it to the Canadian side. But be that as may, that now becomes product of the USA, caught in Killarney.
Now, fish could theoretically be caught in Canada, shipped to China to be seasoned and breaded, frozen, brought back to the States, and packed and marked as a product of the USA.
Absolutely.
And does this happen often?
90% of the time.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. But the consumer is none the wiser when it comes to that.
No, not at all. In fact, that's one of the great difficulties, I think, with the current labeling laws that we have.
One of the other things I was thinking of the other day, I was reading about in a certain state of disbelief, the fact that this lack of transparency in the supply chains when it comes to fish allows for the laundering of much illegally caught fish. Is there any truth in this?
Laundering of illegally caught fish and money.
And money also, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, and again, to the extent that fish is processed, that allows for a lot more substitution and mislabeling.
Right.
Now, the flip side of that is that the fish that's processed, whether it's made into fish sticks or whatever, typically flows through establishments that have various levels of government certification in order to be imported. So there's a higher degree of likelihood that there's going to be some trail of paperwork. So in that case, the substitution usually happens far earlier in the supply chain, which is usually at the boat or broker level. One of the things that's difficult for perhaps the average person to understand is that at the commodity level in seafood on an international basis, product changes hands perhaps 20, 30, 40 times between the catch date and what I'll call the practical in-use date. It's very, very common for brokers to accumulate freezer storage of a product they're basically trading on price, right? And they accumulate the product while the price is going up, and then they'll sell it. And really, it's a lot like a stock and a bond or a financial instrument. This stuff doesn't move; it stays in the same cold storage warehouse, but the title to it changes.
That number of times. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as a consumer, what's the best way that one can ensure that you are indeed consuming the fish that you think you are?
Well, given where we're at, I think we always advocate a good relationship with whoever your supplier is. So as a consumer, if you're in a restaurant, talk to the waitstaff. Talk to the chef owner or the chef if that's available, and make sure that you're comfortable that they know where the product is coming from. I think typically people have a sense of the integrity of the establishment that they're in, whether it's a restaurant or a store, and whether they're being told the truth or not. But really, it does come down to a lot of trust. The alternative to that is to go to large certification schemes. And my concern with a large certification scheme is that it always precludes the smaller processors and the smaller players. And I think that does the quality of the food and the quality of the product a disservice. We're really lucky, we're very lucky in Canada and in Ontario in particular to see this renaissance of producers, whether they're making craft beer or cheese or beef growers or organic vegetable growers or fishers. And I would hate to see that crushed by the burden of a traceability scheme that these small producers can't participate in. And we're already seeing that in the fish industry. The Marine Stewardship Council does a fantastic job of providing traceability through their supply chain. But participation in their program is an expensive endeavor, and by virtue of that, it precludes a lot of smaller fishers. And so a lot of the small fisheries now in Canada, and indeed globally, have consolidated into large corporate groups who can afford to pay the MSC fees to get the product listed through the MSC system, which ultimately gives the buyer the blue check mark and presumably the the comfort of knowing the traceability.
Or of course
I think
they
the
could,
cost of that to society, to the fishing communities that support those fishermen, to the quality of the food, I think is, to me, it's too high.
or of course the consumer could come to Hooked in Leslieville or Hooked on the Danforth and consult with one of your wonderful staff.
We always encourage that.
So, thank you very much for joining us today at Good Food Revolution, giving us your marvelous insights as always.
Thanks.
Bye for now.